listening to the Drinks.com podcast, the business of online alcohol. I'm your host, Brandon Amoroso, and today I'm talking with Quinton Jay, who's the founder and managing director of Bacchus Consulting Group, a veteran VC who has run well-known wineries and private equity funds. Really excited to have you on with your vast array of background and expertise in the beverage alcohol space, Quinton.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Brandon.
So before we jump into some of the topics we want to cover here, can you give everybody just the quick background and I guess TLDR on yourself?
Yeah, I'm a consultant in the wine space, and with the specialization in the ops and the finance side. A little background, sort of, if you want to call it my journey, is I started at Bank of America many years ago. I did commercial lending and then moved into special assets. That's when good loans go bad. Did that for a couple of years, so you kind of saw the life cycle of loans. And then, like any good kid, back in the day, we used to go to business school, or at least apply to business school and get the best one that you possibly can, and then go for a couple of years for your midlife, couple of years of studying and kind of coming back out. Then I got picked up by the Coca-Cola company. And how that kind of happened is, I wanted to learn about brands, right? One of the best brand marketing companies in the world. And then that's how I got into the wine industry, as I was picked up as the general manager for Bonnie Doon Vineyards. And so I worked for Randall Graham for a while, and did that for a little bit, and then I started up my consulting company afterwards. I was with Randall about for 2 years. We used to call them Doon years, similar to dog years, so in your life and working, which is kind of fun. But I learned a lot, right? And so I kind of applied some of those skill sets I learned there, and then just worked, with different clients up and down the valley. Etude, I worked at Etude, which is one of the wine brands that actually kicked off the whole sort of selling your brand to another company, be it large or small, right? So that was very, very exciting to kind of be there, and then working at Behringer Blast for a while, because they were the acquiring company, and how sort of small company gets picked up by a super big company, and how you meld them together. Then I went to go get, one of my clients wanted to hire me full time. It was really hard to do because I really enjoyed consulting and sort of problem solving, but they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And I was a general manager, president for Artesa. And then I got picked up by, so I did that for 5-6 years, and then I got picked up by Sam Brofman, whose family used to own Seagram's. They started a private equity firm called Bacchus Capital Management. They just happen to have the same name that Bacchus guy gets around. Yep. And then I did that for about 7 years, and then I left and continued consulting. So, and then I've kind of have different type of clients. About 80% of my client base is there's a problem, right? That's why people call us to help them solve problems, and the other ones are like, hey, I'm doing pretty well. How do I get better? So, which is kind of nice. Those are the fun ones.
Well, you've obviously stuck in the industry for some time, so
Yeah.
Why? Like, what makes the wine industry so exciting for you?
Yeah, I think, at Coca-Cola I learned a lot, right? You know what I mean? But the wine industry is focused, right? The wine industry is focused on the adult beverage, as adult beverage. So you kind of know who and what, and there's just something magical about wine, right? I mean, you can have a cocktail by yourself, you can have a beer by yourself. Most likely you cannot have a bottle of wine by yourself. At least let's not, right? So I think that's the people aspect that makes it so unique and sort of special, if you want to call it. So that's why I kind of like it. And I just think just as a business, I think it's a kind of a very intriguing, interesting, difficult business to be in, right? So I think that's kind of what's kept me around and kind of kept my interest for so long.
Oh yeah, I can appreciate that. So in terms of, all of the various sort of areas that you've been able to touch, given that experience and more so like, wine generalist capabilities per se, which I think provides a lot of, context that you wouldn't necessarily get if you were super deep in just one area of the wine industry.
Yeah.
What are you looking at, or what are you excited about going into next year, or the next 3 to 5 years? What are some of the things that those listening should be paying attention to, who are in and around the wine category or just beverage alcohol in general?
Yeah, probably the most exciting thing for me is that one of the positives, if there's such a word about it, about COVID, is that it accelerated direct to consumer, right? In all the categories, right? And it even dragged kicking and screaming the wine industry or the adult beverage industry, right, into that space, right? Now you're having, part of it is this the share of stomach thing that people are going after. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. But I think one of the things I'm really excited about and learning is that it's here to stay, right? How do we connect deeper with consumers, right? How do we give them the experience that we have in the industry that is really difficult because of adult signature required, right? And sort of where does that responsibility lie? I mean, one day I'm thinking that there might be a, box that comes to your door, and there's a facial recognition thing, and only you can open the box, kind of like a Mission Impossible thing, right? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So those things excite me, right? Is that I think that finally the industry is starting to look up and say, wow, how do I connect more with these consumers? Because I think initially, since all the business was coming through the tasting room, right? After that experience, how do you sort of keep that magic going, right? So I think that's part of but that's an onus upon the wine industry or the wineries to kind of keep that going and sort of kind of keep their customers engaged. So I think that's probably one of the things I'm really excited about.
And given the either technological advancements or limitations that the wine industry has faced, it feels like, at least over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of progress and strides towards giving the alcohol industry, the same tools and capabilities that other non-regulated industries have, mm-hmm. whether it's, the companies that sell coffee or shoes online. Why can't we use the same things that they use?
Yep.
And I feel like those other industries provide obviously different, and wine is different in various ways, also depending on price point and the type of wine, because you're not buying your $2 Chuck D2C.
Yep.
And if you are, then I don't know how you're making those financials work, but maybe there could be a limited edition $2 Chuck. But
correct. Yep.
And then you have the higher end stuff where there's waiting lists for years and years and years. And so actually, not to go off on a complete tangent, but I find it kind of interesting, those that have that sort of power in the market.
Yep.
If I'm them, how do I think about technology? Because I don't really need to grow or market. I have literally a waiting list of 10 years. But how do I protect that moving forward? So you have these opposite sides of the spectrum, but I think your more traditional verticals that don't have these rules and regulations mm-hmm. can provide a lot of inspiration for how wineries and how alcohol companies can think about creating, direct to consumer experiences.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think that there's this weird sort of bell-shaped curve that sort of happens, right? You're right. There's these guys that have the waiting list, and they're like, dude, what do I need to, what do I need that brain damage, right? And then you have the two, like you're saying, the $2 check is kind of like, I can't even get dude, water's more expensive, right? In some cases, right? You know what I mean? And you're like, okay, I get that, right? We're not shipping the liquid, right? But I think that there's a large sort of middle ground for brands that aren't anointed, right? Mm-hmm. That still need to sort of engage with customers post, right? You know what I mean? I'll go to a winery and I'll go mystery shop every so often. I'll walk into a winery and I'll go with friends and I'll be like, I'll tell them, I go, hey, tell them I'm in local area networks. I'm a computer guy, right? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Don't tell them I'm the wine business, and just kind of see what happens, right? And you kind of see how some are really good, right? They'll get back to you. They'll send you an email. Hey, we had a great time visiting you, Quinton, blah, blah, blah. Love to have you, and you kind of watch that progression, but still, they're not, a lot of them are doing SMS, right? They aren't sort of engaging their customers that way, or even the experience that in the way that they get wine, right? You know what I mean? Something as crazy as we don't ship during the summer. Well, okay, man, right? You know what I mean? But maybe there's a way to do it, right? And then people talk about gel packs and blah, blah, blah. But there's technology out there saying, okay, well, it's going to be, maybe Phoenix would have been difficult for 110 days, 54 days of over 100-degree weather. But, most places you probably could get there, but I think it's also the way that we are set up, that the product needs to go from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast, and there's a lot of ground in the middle. So, but I think there's different people doing different cool things, like, forward shipping to an area. And then from there, then it goes, you know what I mean? And then you're doing the last mile. And then that's not spending 7 days in the truck, but you're maybe only 1 day in the truck. And hopefully that's a good day. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, being here in Florida, I've started to run into some of those issues when it comes to getting wine sent here. It's not as easy as it is in like the Midwest.
Yeah, exactly. But maybe there's a way where, someone partners in. I think, like, for example, FedEx and UPS, those guys are wanting to use their locations as places where people pick up. So, granted, it is a little bit more of a pain, right? It's not to your door. But if you're into wine and you've spent $40, $50, $100 bottle of wine, the last thing you want is it to just kind of sit on your doorstep, right? And, start cooking. So that's how I see that.
Yeah. I think there's been a lot of progress towards, working around some of the limitations, and you're seeing it with successes of, like the business you were formerly at with Denegos. You have others, like I think Bev recently being acquired by, I want to say it was Gallo but you have, I would say, more digitally native brands that are starting to enter into the wine space.
Yep.
And that's providing both inspiration, but also competition for your more traditional, California or Napa wineries, where a lot of the business and also the consumer relationships are started and end in the tasting room.
Yep. Yeah, like there are other sort of like online, like you're saying, all the data, digitally native ones. I mean, I'm just amazed by them sometimes. I'm like, how many people are on your list? And granted, the price points are low, but hey, listen, we need to bring people in this industry, into the wine biz, right? In some shape or form, right? And if those wines, punch above their weight for what they pay for, then they're going to keep on drinking, right? And they'll keep on having more wine with us. So, but they're good at like getting people and kind of getting new customers and sort of bringing them in, right? And it's not sort of pretentious and everything else. So I definitely, those are the things that make me think and kind of go, And then you look at the leadership team, you're like, there's not even a wine guy here, but maybe that's how we solve this, right? You know what I mean? Is that they take things from other industries, right? Be it mattresses or whatever. I saw that you had the guy from Bright Cellars on, right? And I just kind of look at his background and I've been like, wow, he's super smart, right? You know what I mean? And so we need more people like that, right? That are pushing the envelope and kind of bringing that on board. So,
yeah, I think there's more outsiders that are entering into the industry, which is a good thing because and it's not just alcohol either. There's been some other, like I had an internship in the paper industry in like high school, and everybody who was there had been there for like 35 years, and there was just no, like, you just sort of did things the way that you did them because that's how you always did them, and why would you change when there's not really any reason to change?
Correct.
But getting some fresh new blood into the industry will have its hurdles and road bumps, but I think it's going to be better off for the long run because you have people like Joe entering and being like, why the hell do you do some of these things the way that you're doing them? Like, this makes no sense. And that leads to change and ultimately a better experience for the customers too. Yep.
They'll, as I jokingly say, they'll drag us, they'll bring us knuckle draggers along. So,
jumping off of that and the knuckle draggers, what does make a successful wine business in your opinion, especially in 2023? Because it's a lot different than a successful one even 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think that the things that make wine business successful, I think there are probably two things. One is, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's wine or widgets. It's still a business, right? So I think as a winery or as a brand owner or as a, founder of a winery, I think kind of knowing sort of what you're good at and what you're not good at is important, what your weaknesses are, right? It's a really tough business, right? The wine industry. As I jokingly say, I've coined a term that I'm going to trademark. It's called Napaganistan, right? It looks easy from the outside. And I'm like, hey, I made a lot of money or whatever in another industry. I want to buy a vineyard or I want to start a wine brand. And it's a tough business because when you really think about it, it's almost five businesses in one. You have one is if you're growing grapes, you're doing viticulture, so you're spinning a plate here, right? And you have to make good grapes, and then all of a sudden, then you're in this other thing called manufacturing. Oh, winemaking, that's what it's called. And then you're manufacturing wine, you're making wine, right? And you got to make good wine off of good grapes. Then all of a sudden, after you make it, then you got to sell it, and depending on what your route to market is, be it direct to consumer or wholesale, so that's another two separate businesses, right? And then it's just business in general, just kind of business acumen about running a entire business. So all these plates need to spin at the right RPMs. If one is off, it actually impacts the other one, right? If you're not selling enough, but you're bringing in too many grapes, right? And then you're bringing it in, and then all of a sudden then you're using up your cash, and you're like, why do I feel so poor? Well, you have a couple $1 million in inventory. Do you feel better? No, I'd like to have more money, right? You know what I mean? So I think it's one of the things is definitely kind of knowing sort of what you're good at, and then sort of building a team around you, right? So I think that's probably first and foremost. The second would be building a plan. One of the things that I like doing that I learned from my experience at the Coca-Cola Company was I hear all the time from wineries or people in the wine industry, oh, you can't predict things. I go, I get it, right? You're not going to beat Mother Nature, but you can predict how many grapes that you're going to be bringing in, right? You sign the contract, right? Or you own the vineyard, right? There's a range. Sure, it can be zero, maybe like a 20/20 or something like that. But other than a black swan year, you're bringing in something, right? You know how much that you're selling, right? So if you know how to model it, then you can start looking at your business and then start understanding, number one, your cost, right? Because people are really bad about that in the wine business, because understanding your cost is difficult because you have two vintages normally in your cellar, and then you have to allocate costs to those things. So most people don't even know what their cost is until they get to the end, which is crazy in my view, right? I know how much corks are. I know how much my labels are. So I think those are the two sort of main things and then you have sort of a plan of sort of where you want to go. And then in the interim, then you're just sort of updating it. It's kind of go, you know what? XYZ SKU is actually not selling so fast. Ooh, man, what does that mean? Well, how many grapes are we bringing in? Okay. Let's let's dial it back a little bit. Or if we can't, boy, we better start kicking it up and understanding sort of what the impact of that is. So probably those two things I think are sort of bigger understanding of what makes a wine business sort of successful.
The inventory, position is sizable for a lot of these companies, and it's not something that I necessarily thought about before. Coming from a services background, never had to deal with inventory or anything like that, but diving into it over the past 12 months and understanding the financial constraints that these companies are trying to work around, even though they can literally be sitting on millions, if not tens of millions of dollars of inventory. Like, well, you gotta sell through that. And so that presents its own host of unique challenges, especially depending on the brand. Not everything is meant to sit in the cellar for 20, 30 years.
Totally, right.
And making sure that you get through that product before it goes bad is really important.
Yeah, and then you have bulk wine, right? So you got the stuff that's in the bottle, right? But then you got stuff that's in bulk, right? And then you have these grapes that keep on growing. You just can't turn off the grapes, right? You know what I mean? So, you can start compounding your inventory depending on, and I use inventory as an overall piece, right? Both bulk and finished goods. And it can, you can be a couple vintages behind, and blink of an eye, you're like, wow, we got to start liquidating or moving stuff out.
Yeah. No, I'm not envious of those problems at all. But hopping back to the winery side, because we talk a lot about the more digitally native brands, or more so online marketers like Bright Cellars or a Wink, or even Wine Insiders. Then there's the actual wineries themselves, the producers, and I think they actually have a relatively unique, especially with the rising costs of customer acquisition. They have a unique opportunity to be able to have that in-person tasting room experience, and then translate that to a longer life with the customer. But when I went to Napa when was that? Back in like June. That experience that you get in person. Go to the same winery's website and you're like, what just happened? Like there's nothing, everything that you told me in the tasting room, all the really cool things that you do, the history, like all this awesome stuff. You go to the website and you're like, what the hell just happened? There is none of that on this site. So like, of course, nobody's going to buy from you via that website if they're seeing it for the first time. Like, you're just a commodity at that point. It's just a product. You're not putting in any of the unique sort of storytelling components that you have in the tasting room. And then second thing that I thought was a miss for a lot of them was the lack of, automated follow-ups, automated communications, like all the stuff that can happen thereafter once I do have that first visit, because, they get you in the tasting room. You're feeling pretty good after, 2 or 3 glasses of wine. I'm like, oh yeah, like I'd love to buy whatever products you put in front of me. You're so nice, whatever. And, that leads to one thing leads to another, and you're going home with like $300, $400 of wine and some other like little gizmos and widgets and whatnot. But I mean, I haven't bought from a single one of those wineries again because I haven't really even heard from them. And I think, that is a really big opportunity for them that the purely digital players don't have, where you can curate that relationship in person and then have that lead to, an ongoing club, or have that lead to some sort of recurring purchase behavior from people when, going to Napa isn't a once a year or twice a year thing for those outside of the industry. It's maybe a once every 10 years or even a once in a lifetime in some instances. So how do you keep that customer for 5 years, for 10 years when they're never going to come back to your location?
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. All those things. I think the issue is that there's a disconnect, right? The people in the tasting room are great at giving that experience, right? You know what I mean? But then all of a sudden when you leave, there's no one on the other side to kind of continuing that, and it's usually like a wine club manager at best. Right, you know what I mean, that they have. So you need to join the wine club, but there's a lot of people. Like, and my best example. Look, I have a couple examples. Is when I was at Artesa. This was many moons ago, right? But one of the things that we did, right, is we took the wine club on the road, right? And I was like, hey, invite a friend. No one wants to go to a wine event by themselves, right? And we signed up a bunch of wine club members that way, right? And I mean, I was like, dude, it's just like Tupperware in a way, right? Bring a friend and bring a buddy, and next thing you know, you're, the guy's liking the, the experience that they're having, and they're tasting the wine and they're kind of hearing it. So I think that's a big piece. I think that, and it's unfortunate, right? And I mean, for the wine industry is how do they bring that experience there? And, like, for example, one of the things I was looking at a long time ago, it's probably a little bit before its time, was using VR. Right. I mean, if you have put on the headset, right, let's say one day when Apple gets that one out, maybe there'll be more, adoption, but in the interim, why don't you take a drone and fly around your vineyard, right? If you own a winery and vineyard, shame on you if you're not giving someone that experience of walking through the door and sort of looking around, and people can kind of experience or remember that experience, right? They're not connecting back with the consumer. So, this is back in the mid 2000s, right? And I was working with a gentleman, he had a business called Call for Wine, Mark Parton, right? The guy sold wine over the phone. Literally, I was blown away. I was like, who would pick up the phone? This is ridiculous. And I listened to the calls, right? And people were like, oh my God, Bob. Oh, Bob, we had such a great time in Napa. That was the best thing. And they'd go through their spiel, right? And like, hey, you know what I mean? And it's amazing, right? So, I think there's so many touch points that a lot of wineries don't do, primarily because there's no handoff. But now with technology, it's here, right? You know what I mean? Where you can sort of like touch them, email, SMS, whatever, and then you layer back in that human piece. Because I think, earlier you asked me why I love the wine industry. It's because it's still really human based. People are interacting with each other, right? So, but it's kind of how do we bridge that piece over there to get over there, so where it's like when they do go back home, they're in Chicago, it's winter, and they're in their cubicle, or used to be in their cubicle or offices. They remember sitting in the Napa Valley and having a nice glass of wine, right? You know what I mean? There's just nothing, and nothing but good feelings. So how do you sort of bring those pieces back in? So I think there's not been a lot of focus, of either bringing that technology in or them wanting to get it. Right. So I think that's where we need to sort of bridge that gap a little bit. But I think that if the wineries that do well. Right. So
Yeah. And tapping into that social component, which is unique to wine and beverage alcohol in a way that most other product categories don't have.
Correct.
I mean, you have like communities that are created around some verticals, but not in the same way that you have real like human interaction with people over a bottle of wine or over a glass of scotch or whatever it may be.
Bourbon or whatever. Crazy.
Yeah. And that's the unique thing to me about alcohol is that is so innately tied together. Like you could have $1,000 bottle of wine, but you're with crappy company, and it doesn't really matter. You could have a $10 bottle of wine, but you're with people who you care about, or you're having a good time or whatever, and you're like, this is actually better than that $1,000 bottle of wine.
Totally, yeah, exactly. You
don't remember the nights that you drink alone.
Yes,
and you probably shouldn't have as many of those anyways. So
I'm with you on that. So drink responsibly, everybody, as they would say.
Exactly. that can be the tagline for this episode. Well, no, that's all really fascinating to me. I have a couple of fun questions for you. But before I get to those two fun questions, given how sort of close you were to e-commerce and specifically Shopify over the last 2.5, 3 years, what has that evolution been like? Because you were sort of early adopters of that platform and solution when it comes to alcohol, but obviously there's been a lot of investment into it over the last year and a half. Like why Shopify? Why e-commerce? What were you able to do that you weren't necessarily able to with other solutions that are out there? Because I think this goes towards the talk track that I'm really fascinated with, which is, and it's not just alcohol either. There's some other industries like this as well. But those that are regulated or a little bit more antiquated will have a bunch of products that are created, just for them. So you have like SMS just for alcohol. You have e-com platforms just for alcohol. You have, I don't know, name your solution. It's basically what, the big boys are doing, like Shopify or Klaviyo or whatever it may be. But it's tailored and tweaked just a little bit to be very unique and specific to that particular category, which I'm obviously biased, but I think that is a losing game in the long run because you have a defined TAM and you can only invest so much and you can only grow so much. Like you never will be able to have 4,500 or 5,000 engineers like Shopify has because you're only servicing one category. So talk me through what that looked like and how that was a differentiator for you in being able to make Negotia as successful as it has been.
Yeah, I think there's probably two pieces of that, right? One is, the first and foremost, like you were saying, I mean, how do you get like a lot of the solutions that are out there are actually kind of quasi homegrown, for lack of a better word, and have all their limitations that you get, all the bugs and all that other stuff that kind of comes along with it, right? And they're only as big as the 2 or 3 man development team that someone probably outsourced somewhere else, right? I think one of the things that Shopify brought to the table was just that power and the ease. So I'll talk about the ease in a moment, but just kind of the power of just being able to look at a very complex sort of industry, right? You have 50 states. That's literally like selling to 50 different countries. No different, right? You might as well... Shipping it to Mexico is the same as, maybe not as bad as Texas, but still there's different rules and different laws, right? You know what I mean? And you have to abide by those. Then you have the issue about taxation, right? You know what I mean? Which is brain damage within itself.
What states really care about is the money.
Exactly, right? You know what I mean? And they will come after you, right? If you ship not without a permit, if you don't ship, all these things, right? And if you don't have those things buttoned up, they can come back to you, right? And understanding things like Nexus and blah, all these different pieces, right? That you go, dude, I'm just a winemaker, man. I'm just trying to sell a little bit of wine, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so having these solutions kind of pre-thought out in a larger organization like a Shopify, etc., as a platform, kind of brings some of the best minds together into it, right? To solve this problem, right? It's not just one person or one company doing it. It's multiple companies doing it at the same time. And I think that's why they've taken the lead on sort of like understanding and sort of providing the platform for everybody. The second part is the ease, right? You have to remember these are winemakers, right? And the guy's at home, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And maybe he's no different than the Etsy guy, Etsy person, right? You know what I mean? That wants to sell something, right? I got a product, I got to get it online. How do I do that, right? And I think that they make it easy enough for people to kind of get on there, right? And that's what's bringing in the critical mass, right? And then the people are able to, sell what they sell. And and how they do it. So I probably would say it's those two things, and then you layer on sort of other software that you can just plug in, like, oh, this is the taxing thing. Okay, good. I'd like that. You know what I mean? So bolt that guy on, right? Oh, I'd like to do integrated marketing, emails with A/B testing or whatever. You know what I mean? So they're bringing on all these pieces, and all of a sudden, then you have a platform that makes you look and feel a lot bigger, but you have all the professional things behind it. So that's probably why I would say that was why we were able to ramp up so quickly, so fast, right? Is because the platform was there. We weren't dealing with all the buggy things, and we could focus in on the business instead of trying to spend all of our time, oh my God, why did the software not work? Why can't this customer get this, right? You know what I mean? And there was always somebody there to kind of help out. So I think that allows the makers, whatever they make, do what they do, and then have the technology. And like I said, it doesn't matter if it's wine or widgets.
Yeah, you basically have three, separate, very distinct business functions in a alcohol brand. You have the producer, which they've pretty much got that all covered. But then you have marketing, and then you have like legal, regulatory, tax, and those are the two you have with marketing, and then with the legal, regulatory, and tax that gets overlooked far too often, I think. But then that is the differentiation factor between those that are very successful and those that aren't. It's not enough to just be a grower or producer, even if your wine is great. There's like a lot of great wine out there. There's a lot of great, booze. There's a lot of great beer. You have to invest in all three of those different areas in order to be successful.
Yeah. And if you're a small company or a medium-sized company, where do you have the funds to do that, right? I mean, the margins are pretty tight as they are, you know what I mean? And on an EBITDA aspect, and not everyone's willing to invest all that money. So I guess it's a law of larger numbers of people coming together, so which is good.
Well, my fun question for you.
Yeah.
What is your favorite wine memory?
Ooh. In 2007, I had a little time off in a good way. And I have a friend of mine who owns a winery in Sancerre. And you know how everyone's like, oh, come visit the winery, come visit me, and everything else. And his name is Jean-Laurent Vacheron. And I had about 2 months off, and I was like, it's the summer, and I was single, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go to France. And I just called him up, and I said, hey, it's Quinton. He goes, hey, Quinton, how are you? And I was like, great. I got a little time. I'm thinking about coming over to Sancerre. Can I stay for a month? I was really only thinking for a month and maybe travel around Europe a little bit. And I ended up spending about 2 months there. And, I just loved it. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Sancerre's, then and just even more now, just kind of like the geology and the history and just, it was just fun, right? I mean, I really got a chance to kind of see the wine business from the ground up, from the vines and where they make the wine and everything else. So that's probably one of my most fun memories, in professional and personal, for a lifetime. And Jean Laurent and I became really good friends too. So, which is great.
That's awesome. And his name is also totally awesome. Like, I wish I had a name that sounded that cool.
I know, Jean-Laurent Vacheron.
Yeah, that's going to be hard to beat. And then last question.
Yeah.
If you had to pick one bottle, what would it be, and then who would you be sharing it with?
The bottle goes back to Vacheron. There's a label there's a bottling that they have called La Romaine, and it is a particular piece of ground in their estate. And I jokingly say that it's like it's like chewing on rocks. But I know that's not a good marketing descriptor, but it's amazing, right? The limestone and just the chalk that's there, right, and the flint that you get, it's amazing. So definitely would be that bottle of wine, and yeah, my dad passed away several years ago. I'd love to share if I could pick anyone in the world, it'd probably be him, because he was really big into wine and kind of helped me, with my wine sort of journey. I mean, he had a little collection. He had really good stuff, right? He only bought the best, right? You know what I mean? Not a lot of it, right? You know what I mean? But he did have a few bottles that he really cherished, and depends on whose birthday it was which bottle came out. Cousin, maybe a little lower. Mine, a little better, so that's how we did it that way.
There's a pecking order for sure in terms of who got what wine. So.
Exactly, right? So
hey, I think the same thing. I mean, I'm literally, anytime I'm going to dinner or I have people visiting, there's a pecking order, but also there's a level of, does this person actually even really care? Or like, what's the appreciation level going to be there? Yes. They don't have to have a lot of experience. They could have almost no experience, but a desire to learn or anything like that. I mean, that's how I got super into it, was, other people taking an interest in me expanding my palate. But I had the desire, and I had the want, I guess, to learn. Yeah. Whereas, some people, it's, White Claw, exactly. Happy Dad, whatever it may be. I'm like, you guys are getting the free shit. I'm not breaking out the cellar for you.
Exactly. Because then it would just be me drinking by myself. So why, right?
Right. And in that case, I'm just going to hang out with my dog on the couch. So
yeah, exactly. Most definitely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Yeah. If people want to get in contact or in touch with you, what would be the best way to do so online?
Online is, my email is QJAY at Bacchus, and that's spelled BACCHUS, CG.com.
Okay. Awesome. Yep. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes here.
Yeah.
But thank you again for coming on, and for everybody listening. As always, this is Brandon Amoroso. You can find me at drinks.com. And we will see you on the next episode.